People always warn me not to drive the back roads after midnight in New Mexico. The desert remembers, they'd say. Deaths, curses, secrets, the kind of things that don't fade or get buried with time. I never believed it. I thought it was just some old-timers spinning tales to scare off city folk. I thought I was smarter than the superstitions. But after that night, I don't laugh anymore. Not even a little. It was a cool October night in 1998. The kind of chill that seeps into your bones, making you wish you'd worn a thicker jacket. I was driving back to my apartment in Santa Fe after a long, grueling shift at the diner in Albuquerque. The roads were empty. The stars above were faint behind a thin veil of clouds, and the highway stretched out ahead of me like a ribbon of black silk. I was exhausted, eyes heavy, but I wanted to make it home as soon as possible. I had taken that route hundreds of times before. The I-25, a straightforward highway connecting two cities I knew like the back of my hand. But that night, distracted and worn out, I missed my usual exit. Maybe it was the way the moonlight flickered through the windshield, or maybe the way my mind drifted to memories of home, but I realized too late that I'd overshot the turn. I tried to correct my course, but the GPS wasn't working, the screen blinking out like it had lost its signal. My phone died a minute later, no bars, no hope of a call or a text, the kind of isolation that creeps up on you when you're alone in the middle of nowhere. I was on a dirt back road I didn't recognize, winding deeper into the desert. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating stretches of cracked earth, tangled sagebrush, and gnarled mesquite trees that cast long, spindly shadows. The silence was profound, like the world was holding its breath. I could hear the soft hum of the engine and the occasional scrape of gravel beneath my tires, but nothing else. No animals, no insects, no wind. Just stillness. I kept driving, hoping the road would curve back towards civilization. My eyes flicked between the dark road and the edges of the riverbed that ran parallel to me. Normally, this riverbed would be filled with rushing water, the lifeblood of this arid land during the rainy season. But now it was dry, cracked like a giant's dry skin, lined with smooth stones and dust. That's when I saw her. At first I thought maybe it was a trick of the light, a reflection or a shadow dancing in the breeze. But no, there she was, a figure walking along the edge of the riverbed. A woman. She wore a long white dress that fluttered around her legs like smoke. Her hair was wild, tangled, and hung down past her shoulders. She moved with slow, deliberate steps, like someone who had been walking for a long time and was too tired to hurry. There was something about her that was deeply unsettling, though. It wasn't just the way she looked. It was how she existed in that place and time. It was like she didn't belong there, like she had slipped through the cracks between worlds and had somehow become stranded in ours. I instinctively slowed the truck, the engine's rumble suddenly loud in the vast silence. My heart thumped in my chest, and for a moment, I thought about stopping, about rolling down the window to ask if she needed help. The rational part of me told myself she could be lost, hurt, or scared. Maybe someone had left her there, or maybe she was running from something. But deep in my gut, a cold whisper hissed, "Don't stop. Keep driving." I hated myself for it, but I pressed my foot on the accelerator and eased the truck forward. Then she turned toward me. Her face was a pale, ghostly white like it had never seen the sun. Her skin was stretched tight over sharp cheekbones, and her eyes were sunken, hollow pits that seemed to swallow the light from my headlights. They weren't normal eyes. They were dark, endless voids that pulled me in and filled me with a terrible, unexplainable dread. Her lips trembled and parted, and then I heard it. She cried. Not a soft sob or a broken whisper, but a cry so deep and raw that it felt like it tore through the fabric of time itself. A sound that wasn't just sorrow, but rage and despairs intertwined, stretching back centuries. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Her voice cracked in broken whispered words I barely understood, but they etched themselves into my mind. Mis hijos. ¿Dónde están mis hijos? My blood turned to ice. A chill swept over me, crawling up my spine like fingers of frost. Her eyes locked on mine and her mouth opened into a scream that was something between a banshee's wail and a mother's death cry. It wasn't human. My foot slammed the gas pedal and the tires skidded on loose gravel as I tore away from her, dust billowing behind the truck. The sound of that scream chased me down the road, pounding in my ears. My mirrors showed only empty desert, but I could feel her presence cold, relentless, right behind me. I didn't dare look back. When I finally reached the highway, the scream stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed in on me from all sides. I didn't sleep that night, but not a wink. After speeding back onto the highway, the city lights of Santa Fe still seemed miles away, but I couldn't bring myself to stop the truck. Every time I slowed down, every time the engine's hum faded into silence, I heard it again. The wailing. That terrible, unearthly cry echoing in my ears like a ghost trapped between worlds. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her standing there on the dirt road, her pale dress billowing, those empty eyes boring into mine. But there was never anything. Just the empty road stretching behind me, bathed in the faint glow of the moon. When I finally pulled into my driveway just before dawn, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn off the ignition. The silence of my little house was almost worse than the screaming. It pressed on me like a weight, thick and suffocating. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring at the cracked dashboard, trying to convince myself it had all been a hallucination, something brought on by exhaustion or the shadows playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. I'd felt it, the raw, aching sorrow that tore through the desert night. Inside the house, I kept the lights on. All of them. The overhead lamps, the porch light, even the tiny nightlight in the bathroom. I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. That night, just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard it again. Soft at first, a dripping, steady sound like water falling into a pool. I sat up, hard hammering, listening. The bathroom faucet was dry. The pipes were silent. I got out of bed and crept down the hall, every creak of the floorboards sounding like thunder in the quiet house. When I reached the bathroom, I froze. There, in the porcelain sink, was a small puddle of water. And in the center floated a single, long strand of black hair. I live alone. My breath caught. I wanted to reach out and touch it, to convince myself it was just some fluke, some impossible trick. But I couldn't move. The water dripped again. I slammed the door shut and ran back to my bedroom. I locked it and collapsed into bed, wrapping my arms around myself like a shield. The next few days were a blur of exhaustion and fear. I tried to keep busy, to distract myself, but the crying followed me everywhere. It was in my dreams, at first faint and distant, then growing louder, more insistent. In the dreams, I was back at the riverbed. The woman was there, standing just beyond the edge, her face streaked with tears, her eyes endless voids. She reached for me, fingers outstretched, voice breaking as she whispered for her children. I woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, my throat raw from screaming. I started searching. I needed to know who she was. Who was this woman, crying for children lost long ago? The name escaped me, like a word on the tip of my tongue. I found myself pulled toward the old stories of the Southwest, the legends whispered over campfires and in hushed tones. La Llorona, the weeping woman, a ghost who wanders the rivers and deserts, mourning the children she lost, children she herself drowned in a fit of madness. The stories said she cursed the living with her sorrow, dragging them into the same endless grief. The more I read, the more I felt the impossible truth. I had seen La Llorona, and she hadn't finished with me yet. The next morning, I woke up feeling hollow, like something inside me had already been taken. I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman's wails had burrowed into my bones. That night by the riverbed was no random encounter. It was a warning, a summons. I spent the day holed up in my small apartment, poring over every book, every article, every fragment of local folklore I could find about La Llorona. The more I read, the more the legend came alive. not just as a ghost story told around campfires, but as a living nightmare stretching back centuries, entwined with the land itself. They say La Llorona's story begins in grief and madness. A woman named Maria, who lived long ago in the Spanish colonial era, drowned her own children in the river in a fit of rage after being betrayed by her husband. The horror of what she'd done shattered her mind, and she took to wandering the rivers and desert canyons, crying for her lost hijos, her children, forever cursed to search for them in vain. But the story doesn't end there. The legends warn that those who hear her cries or see her ghost become marked. Some disappear without a trace, others go mad, haunted by the relentless wailing. Some are dragged to the riverbed, never to be seen again. I felt a cold shiver run through me as I realized I wasn't just reading about an old myth. I was living it. I pulled up news reports on my computer, digging through decades of unexplained disappearances near the riverbeds and back roads outside Santa Fe. Many cases mentioned hearing strange cries in the night, ghostly figures by the river, or travelers who never made it home. One case stood out. A young man, not much older than me, vanished near the same stretch of riverbed where I'd seen her. His last text message was a single line: "I see her, the crying woman." The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. Was I next? I called my friend Maria, an anthropology student who specialized in Southwestern folklore and legends. If anyone could make sense of what was happening to me, it was her. When I explained everything, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You need to be careful. La Llorona is more than a story. She's a spirit of rage and sorrow, bound to the riverbed, but she can cross into our world." "Why me?" I asked. "Maybe she sees something in you. Or maybe you crossed the wrong place at the wrong time. But once she attaches herself, it's hard to get free." Maria suggested I visit the local library's archives, where old Spanish colonial records might reveal more about Maria, the original La Llorona. She warned me to go during the day and never near the riverbed alone. That afternoon, I found myself standing in the dusty stacks of the old library, thumbing through brittle pages yellowed with age. I found mention of a Maria, her tragic tale, and a curse whispered by the priests who tried to save her soul. The entry ended with a chilling note: "Beware the river, for she still walks its banks, and her tears are the last sound you will hear." As I closed the book, the lights flickered. I wasn't alone. The flicker of the library lights wasn't just a malfunction. As I closed the old book, a cold draft swept through the room, despite the heavy glass windows and the still October air outside. The hairs on my arms stood on end. A faint whisper, barely audible, brushed past my ear. I spun around, heart pounding, but no one was there. The librarian shot me a worried glance. "You all right, son?" I nodded, though my voice trembled. "Yeah, just tired." I left the library as fast as I could, the weight of the curse pressing down on me like a shroud. The woman's wails echoed in my mind, louder, closer. That night, at home, the nightmare began again. The house grew colder, the shadows deeper. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decayed flowers, like the riverbed itself had invaded my room. I saw her again, standing just beyond the bedroom doorway, her pale face illuminated by the streetlight filtering through the curtains. Her eyes were dark wells, endless and hungry. She reached out a hand, fingers trembling with sorrow. I froze. The crying started, soft at first, then rising in a crescendo that made my ears ache. "Where are my children?" she wailed. "Where are my hijos?" I covered my ears, but the sound pierced through like a blade. Days blurred into nights. Sleep was a distant memory. Everywhere I went, I felt her presence, watching, waiting. I tried to tell myself it was madness, a psychological break triggered by exhaustion and fear. But when my friends started to avoid me, whispering about how pale I looked, about the haunted look in my eyes, I knew it was real. One night I found a message scratched into the bathroom mirror. Find them. But who? Her children? Or those lost souls she had cursed? I had to find out before the crying consumed me. The message on the mirror haunted me. Find them. But how? And who were them? I was spiraling. The crying woman had invaded my life completely, her sorrow and rage filling every corner of my mind. Desperate for answers, I reached back out to Maria, my friend who knew the folklore inside and out. I told her everything, the sightings, the dreams, the mirror message. She didn't hesitate. There are old rituals, she said, voice low, to try to appease her, to give her peace. We met at a small cafe, the air thick with the scent of coffee and cinnamon. Maria pulled out an ancient-looking book, fragile and worn. There's a ceremony, she explained, meant to honor the children and soothe the weeping woman's grief. It involves water, offerings, prayers. It's risky spirits like her don't take kindly to interference. But I was beyond fear. That night, armed with candles, a silver cross Maria lent me, and handfuls of wildflowers, I drove back toward the riverbed. The moon hung low and heavy, casting long shadows over the cracked earth. The silence was almost unbearable. I set up the offerings near the water's edge, lighting candles that flickered in the dry wind. I recited the prayers Maria had taught me, words in Spanish, old and sacred. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a chill swept over the riverbed. The air thickened. And I heard her crying again, so close I could feel the tears on my face. From the shadows emerged the woman, her dress tattered, hair wild, eyes empty but burning with endless grief. She stepped forward, voice trembling. "Have you found them? My hijos?" I held the cross tightly, voice shaking. "I'm trying to help you, to end your pain." Her cry turned to a scream, a sound that ripped through the night like a knife. The ground trembled beneath me. Suddenly, dark shapes rose from the cracked riverbed, ghostly figures of children, reaching out with translucent hands. They surrounded me, cold and silent. I felt their sorrow, their confusion. La Llorona fell to her knees, weeping. "I cannot find peace," she whispered, "not until my children are free." In that moment, I understood. The curse wasn't just hers. It was tied to the lost souls trapped in the desert, crying out for release. I promised her I would try. But as I turned to leave, the wind howled and the children vanished, leaving me alone in the empty riverbed. I knew the battle was far from over. The night air was cold and still as I drove away from the riverbed, the flickering candlelight behind me fading into the darkness. But the silence inside my truck was suffocating. The encounter with La Llorona, the ghostly children rising from the cracked earth, the woman's agonized cries, clung to me like a second skin. I couldn't shake it. It felt like a weight pressing down on my chest, heavy and unrelenting. I glanced at the silver cross Maria had given me, resting on the dashboard. It gleamed faintly in the moonlight, but its presence did little to calm the storm inside my mind. What promise had I made? To find her children, to free their souls. But how? Where do you find children who have long since been lost to the river's depths, or maybe never truly existed in this world? Back home, the house was too quiet. The oppressive silence was broken only by the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards, or the rustling of wind outside. I barely noticed the hours slipping away as exhaustion finally claimed me. But sleep brought no relief. That night, the dreams returned, darker and more vivid than before. I was back at the riverbed, but the water was alive, churning with shadowy forms beneath its surface. The woman was there, her hands reaching into the depths, pulling out shapes that morphed into the translucent children. Their eyes, hollow and mournful, locked onto mine. "Help us," they whispered, voices like wind through dead leaves. I tried to reach for them, but the water was cold and pulling me down. I was drowning, sinking into the darkness with their endless cries echoing in my ears. I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, heart pounding like a drum. Days passed in a haze. The crying woman wasn't just a specter at the riverbed anymore. She followed me. I heard her in the dripping faucet, the wind rattling windows, in whispers carried by the desert air. Shadows flitted in the corners of my vision. always gone when I looked directly. I became obsessed. I searched libraries, archives, even talked to old-timers who claimed to have seen La Llorona herself. Most dismissed me as a fool, but a few whispered warnings, tales of others who tried to free the curse, only to disappear or go mad. One evening, Maria and I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by candles and dusty books. "We need to understand the curse itself," she said, eyes grim. "The story of Maria, the woman who became La Llorona, isn't just legend, it's a key. If we know why she lost her children, maybe we can help her find peace." We pored over centuries-old documents, colonial records, and oral histories. The story that emerged was even darker than I imagined. Maria was betrayed by a jealous lover, drove mad by grief, and drowned her children in a moment of rage. But some versions hinted at darker forces at work, spirits or curses that twisted her mind, binding her to an eternal torment. The more we learned, the more I felt the curse creeping into my soul. My dreams grew worse. I started waking with scratches on my arms, cold spots in the house, and the overwhelming sensation of being watched. One night, the crying woke me so violently, I felt like I was being pulled out of my body. I saw her again, closer this time, standing at the foot of my bed. Her eyes, endless black pits, locked onto mine. "Find them," she whispered, voice breaking with despair. But who? And how? I was running out of time. The curse was claiming me. The line between waking and dreaming blurred until I no longer knew which was real. The crying woman haunted every moment, her presence seeping into the fabric of my life. My apartment became a cage, walls closing in, shadows lengthening. At work, my hands trembled. I struggled to focus. Colleagues whispered about my pale complexion, my hollow eyes. Friends stopped calling. The isolation deepened. Every night, the dreams grew darker. I was pulled back to the riverbed, where the children waited, their silent pleas echoing through the night. Their eyes were endless pits, sorrowful but accusing, as if I held the key to their release. One evening, after a day spent wandering in a fog of fear and exhaustion, I found a letter slipped under my door. No return address, just a single line written in shaky handwriting. "Find the altar before the river dries." Confused and desperate, I scoured the riverbed the next day. The desert sun beat down mercilessly as I searched for any sign of the altar. Maria mentioned an old ceremonial site used by indigenous tribes, rumored to hold spiritual power. Hours passed with no luck, until just before dusk I spotted something half buried in the sand, a circle of weathered stones, etched with symbols I'd seen in the ancient books. I knelt beside it, heart racing. Could this be the place to break the curse? That night I returned with offerings, flowers, candles, water from the river, and the silver cross. As I arranged them carefully inside the circle, the wind rose, carrying with it a faint, sorrowful melody. The crying woman appeared, but this time she was less threatening, almost pleading. Her voice was a whisper. "Help us find peace." The ground trembled. The air grew heavy. Shadows coalesced into forms the children, reaching for release. I closed my eyes, repeating the prayers Maria taught me, hoping to sever the curse. When I opened them, the altar was empty. The crying had ceased. For a moment I felt peace. But as I turned to leave, a cold hand gripped my shoulder. Her eyes met mine, full of sorrow and warning. "Remember me." The grip on my shoulder was ice cold, like death's own hand. I whipped around, heart hammering, expecting to see La Llorona's mournful face inches from mine. But the space behind me was empty. Only the whisper of desert wind and the distant call of nightbirds. For the first time in what felt like months, a fragile thread of hope flickered in my chest. Had the ritual at the altar worked? The riverbed was eerily quiet. The oppressive weight lifted, if only for a moment. Driving home, under a sky sprinkled with stars, I dared to believe that perhaps I had begun to break the curse. The silence was soothing, almost unnatural, but I knew better than to trust it completely. That night I slept deeply, longer than I had in weeks. When I awoke, sunlight spilled warmly through the window, and for a brief moment, I forgot the crying woman. The house felt peaceful, even safe. But peace, I soon learned, is often only a brief reprieve in stories like mine. My phone buzzed with a message from Maria. I found something. An old priest's journal. It mentions a final rite, one that might free La Llorona's soul completely. But it's dangerous. I met her later that day, the journal heavy in her hands. Pages yellowed with age detailed a ritual performed on the anniversary of the tragedy, one requiring not just offerings, but an act of forgiveness and remembrance. It's the last step, Maria said. To end the cycle, you need to forgive her and help her remember who she was before the curse. The idea terrified me. What if forgiving her meant inviting her fully into my life? What if she never wanted peace? Still, I knew I had no choice. We planned the ritual for the next full moon back at the riverbed. Until then, I prepared, cleansing my home with sage, meditating, steeling myself for what was to come. The crying woman had been my nightmare and my burden, but maybe, just maybe, she could be freed. And maybe I could be free too. The night of the full moon arrived with a bitter wind that swept through the desert like a mournful sigh. Maria and I drove to the riverbed in near silence, the weight of what we were about to do pressing on us. We arrived at the altar just as the moon rose, casting a cold silver light over the cracked earth. Maria carried the old priest's journal, and I brought the candles, flowers, and the silver cross. The air was thick, the silence heavy with anticipation. We set up the offerings carefully inside the stone circle, lighting the candles one by one until a soft glow lit the night. Maria began reading the prayers, her voice steady but low, the ancient words weaving through the night air like a spell. Then it was my turn. I spoke aloud the words from the journal, calling on forgiveness and remembrance. I told the story of Maria, not just the cursed woman, but the mother, the wife, the woman betrayed and broken. The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of crying, growing louder until it surrounded us. Then she appeared. La Llorona, pale and spectral, stepped forward. Her eyes were black voids, but her expression was softer this time, less rage, more sorrow. I met her gaze, voice trembling but firm. I forgive you, Maria, I remember you. Her wail pierced the night, a sound of anguish and release. The ghostly children emerged, their forms clearer, their eyes full of longing. They reached out, and for a moment, I felt a wave of peace wash over me. Then the children vanished, one by one, fading into the moonlight. La Llorona's figure began to dissolve, her cries turning into a whisper. Thank you, she said, voice fading. Remember me. And then, silence. The riverbed was still. Maria and I stood in the cold dawn, the first light breaking over the horizon. I felt it, no longer the weight of the curse, but a lightness I hadn't known in months. We drove back in silence, each of us lost in thought. The crying woman of the riverbed was finally at rest,